no problem whatsoever. I just start the recording.
Yep.
That's no problem because actually my main approach to these interviews is more a semi-structured one, which
Mhm.
involves just in colloquial terms, letting it flow, more as a conversation than an interview where I just bomb you with questions, which I do
Okay.
not want to do right now.
Yeah, that works.
Sure. So maybe before we start with the questions, before we start with the questions, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So tell me about yourself. Like, I know you work at this Expand research project, which is affiliated with uh, EDCI.
Mhm.
Um, also works, it's a subsidiary from BCG.
For
So
Boston
please
Consulting
explain
Group.
me
Yep.
some about that, just so that
Yeah,
I.
sure. I'd be happy to. So I am relatively new at Expand. I just started about a month ago. And
Mhm,
before that, I was in business school at the University of Vermont. And the program there was all about using business as a force for good. So
mhm,
understanding sustainability and how that can
mhm.
work with how that works with a business. Sorry, one sec. Just gonna silence my phone. It's like going crazy on me right now. Okay, sorry. I'm back. Yeah,
All right.
so the program was focused on clean energy, sustainability, and really all sorts of different types of sustainability. So for some,
Mhm.
in some angles, that means environmental sustainability, right? Using renewable energy, minimizing waste, things like
Yeah.
that. But there's also sort of the human sustainability aspect of a business, right? Not burning out your people,
Yeah.
recruiting and bringing in new talent,
Mhm,
keeping people motivated. So the
mhm,
program was all about that aspect of business and what that means. So
mhm,
it was a great experience and it really well equipped me to join Expand Research. And so Expand is a primarily a benchmarking firm or shop, you could call it. So
uh-huh,
we look at, our clients would primarily be from the financial services sector or banks, and they are looking to understand how they stack up. For example, if they spend a certain amount of money on market research, they want to know how that
mhm,
compares to other banks. So we collect data and create
mhm,
anonymized benchmarks so that banks can understand and other institutions can understand how they stack up. And then we work
mhm,
with Boston Consulting Group to come up with strategies to, say you are spending too little or spending too much or getting too little out of
mhm,
what you are spending, right? Your return isn't where you want it to be. We would then work with Boston Consulting Group to come up with and implement a strategy to address that. And so that's
mhm.
really how that relationship works. Expand is the benchmarking arm, and then Boston Consulting Group is the sort of strategy and implementation arm.
Okay, I see. So, you work with BCG together to implement this EDCI project, or
Yeah.
do I
So yeah,
understand it well?
that has been going since we're starting year 2 now of the project, and for that initiative, the private equity firms that are participating in it will submit their ESG data to us to Expand Research, and then we'll analyze the data, help them understand which of their portfolio companies might be ones that they wanted to target for some type of ESG transformation. We
Mm-hmm.
look at it across a variety of metrics, look at the sector, look at the geography. We look at all these various different sort of slices of the data to
Yeah.
understand which portfolio companies should be targeted by the private equity firms, whether it be the LPs, the investors, or the GPs, sort of the fund managers, the
Mm-hmm.
general partners, whoever it may be, to help them understand which portfolio companies are really doing well and which ones might need a targeted intervention to address one of these metrics, one or more of these metrics.
Mm-hmm. So you actually work with this data, like you have access to it and you research with that in order to get these strategies you mentioned.
Correct.
Okay, I get it. Um, all right. So then Expand is like a third party firm who works
So
together with
Expand
BC.
is fully owned by Boston Consulting Group.
Okay.
So it is we are technically within the umbrella of Boston Consulting Group, but
Uh-huh.
we're kind of operate
More,
slightly, you know, the sort of on the administrative side, certain things are different, but for
Mhm.
the purposes of the EDCI, it's important to say that it's run and managed by the steering committee, which is a group of private equity firms.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
Boston Consulting Group is providing pro bono consulting services on this project to help stand it up, kind of be the arms and legs, run the back end
mhm,
of the project, and expand as one piece of that
yeah,
Boston Consulting Group
yeah,
relationship.
yeah. Actually, within my research, I found out that a lot of researchers think one of the main hurdles that exist in private equity industry right now is this of the non-systematic data collection, which means
Definitely.
that most private equity companies doesn't have any benchmarks, which I see you're working on solving.
Yeah,
So
and that's really part of the idea behind
yeah,
the EDCI is trying to get the industry to agree on at least
yeah,
a starting point of metrics. Obviously, there
yeah,
are a near infinite number of metrics you could collect and that you could look at. But the idea is really to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good and understand that, you know, this set of metrics that we have is by no means the perfect set of metrics for every company to look at, but it's
yeah,
a common starting point where the industry can come together and talk about and agree upon these metrics. And then over time, we hope that we'll add more metrics, we'll add more sort of, you know, again, slices, use that same word
yeah.
again. So, you know, if you're looking, want to really just look at, for example, healthcare, you could look at a specific set of metrics within healthcare that would be different from
Okay,
metrics that you would look at for something like manufacturing, right? Because
yeah.
obviously there's going to be different considerations that companies
Hmm.
in those businesses need to make. Right now, we're not there yet. We're still at just like the very top level. Like, let's look at greenhouse gas emissions. Let's look at
Yeah,
renewable energy usage.
yeah.
Usage. Let's look at the diversity of your board and your senior staff.
Hmm.
Right. So
Hmm.
we're still very much up here, but there's a lot of potential to get down into different verticals.
Yeah, I see. I also understand that LPs and GPs have this incentive of having benchmarks to get this comparability within the system. But what
Mm-hmm.
does BCG and Expand wins like for most BCG with its pro bono consulting? What is actually the incentive for the company to work on this? Do you have any idea?
Yeah. Um, So, I mean, I don't have, I'll preface this by saying that, you know, I'm relatively new, so I don't know, like, sort of the whole, like, I'm sure there's a whole story
Yes.
about how this project got stood up,
Okay. Yeah.
but a lot of the participating companies are core clients of Boston Consulting
Oh
Group.
yeah, 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 I
And
guess.
so there is, I
This
would, again, and
connection. Yeah.
I don't
No.
really know, but
Mm-hmm.
sort of I can imply that, you know, we do this analysis, we help them understand where
Yeah.
they're falling short, and we're coming up with a strategy of how they can
S-
solve that problem. That then they would potentially want to use us as they would want to hire us to then do that work for, you know, help them do that work. So it is a bit of like an
Yeah.
investment, kind of pay it forward.
Yeah.
But right now, this is also from a BCG perspective. The climate and sustainability is one of our moonshots, one of our like, we're putting resources towards this, and we just kind of believe that if we commit resources to this and do this work in the long run,
Yeah.
it'll benefit us. We don't know exactly how, but like we can kind
Mm-hmm.
of see by, you know, the writing on the wall, reading the tea leaves, whatever expression you want to use. As a company, BCG sees the opportunity to really lead on climate and sustainability and view this project as one of those. So even though
Mm-hmm.
it's not producing returns right now in
Yes.
2022,
Yes.
we can project with a reasonable degree of certainty that in 5 to 10 years, we think there will be fruits for our labors, even if it's not immediate.
Yeah. 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 I see that also. So almost all your data or all your data is based on ESG metrics, right?
For this project, yes.
Okay. Um, do you try to measure financial effects on this? on ESG integration?
So not directly. That is something that we kind of talk about behind the scenes and that we're working on, trying
Yeah.
to figure out how can we specifically make these ties. There is lots of data that exists by, reports that other people have
Yeah.
published, white papers, things like this, that do show that companies that are more diverse, companies that tend to really invest in their people and in their processes to make them more sustainable over the long run do see better financial returns. There is data that suggests that. And really the folks that are participating in this initiative, we kind of view it as a give, not as a given, that's the wrong word, but view that there is, there are benefits that exist, especially
Yeah.
from if you think about the perspective of a private equity firm, right? A lot of times they acquire a company where they see an issue, they fix the issue, and then they resell the company, right? Like that's typically
Yeah. Yeah.
that is typically how they have made their added value in the past, right? So
Yeah.
for a lot of them, they see ESG as just the new frontier of that, right? I can pick up a company that is horrible, they pollute all the time, they do all these terrible things. I fix them up. Now they're not polluting anymore. People like working there. They're getting better talent. That's going to raise the value of the company, like naturally, right? Like we can see
Yeah.
that,
I
and I
see.
think, and a lot of the firms see that as well. And so they want to start be early movers and start developing their own competencies as a private equity firm, so that they can go out and help some of these dirtier companies, however you want to define that, help some of these companies that maybe wouldn't rate as highly be able to turn that around and fix it, because there is serious demand from from investors, from consumers, to want to buy products from companies that they see as sustainable and well run, and for investors to invest in companies that they view are sustainable and well run. So
Yeah.
there's a few different forces at play here that are all driving the interest that we've seen in the initiative.
Yeah, I can imagine also in the US, maybe also worldwide, there is this tendency of ESG and uh, sustainability financing, sustainability production. Do you think there is a difference between geographical areas like the US in comparison to Europe, for example? Do you have this
Oh, absolutely.
difference
Yeah,
or?
they're definitely different markets. I would say it's definitely, from the US perspective, climate change is much more political here, right? Like at the end of the day, people that identify as Democrats are much more likely to identify climate change as an issue than people that are Republican. And that's not
Okay.
like that's just like what the polls tell us, what the data tells us, right? So that's one thing in America. And so businesses then have to contend with the fact that, if, for example, in the 2024 election, there's a president from the Republican Party elected, that could have a serious impact on climate regulations, on something like a carbon tax, on sort of all of the government elements. Make it the uncertainty in Washington makes it very difficult for businesses to plan around what to do relative to ESG, because they don't know what's going to be required and what's going to be voluntary. And for the most part, businesses, I think, are still at the stage of like, we'll do what's required and maybe a little bit more, but like
Yeah,
we'll do
like
what's required.
minimum standards, right?
For the most part, there are obviously businesses that are different, right? There are plenty
Yeah,
of
yeah.
companies, the Patagonias of the world, right? The Unilevers
Yeah.
of the world, right? There are plenty of companies that will go above and beyond, but for the most part, people want to know what's the rule, and I'll do that, and enough more that people don't think I'm a scumbag. Whereas in Europe, I think they're really seeing, I think the war in Ukraine has really shed a lot of light on, specifically related to renewable energy, how important it is to transition away from things like natural gas. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I think that event has really, it's horrible to say that like something good is coming out of like such a horrible situation with that war,
No, but
but
yeah,
as a silver
you're right.
lining, I think it does exist, and it's drawn a lot of attention to the fact that basically all of Europe was completely dependent, not all of Europe, but large portions of Europe were very dependent on Soviet gas or Russian gas, whatever the word of the
Yeah,
day is. But
Germany.
and so it's shed light on this issue. And so I think
Yeah.
the overall trend that I would say is similar is that there's a lot more focus on the E of ES&G than on S&G, E being environmental. That's where a lot of the focus is right now, and that's where the main reason is that it's much more easily quantified. We can quantify
Yeah.
greenhouse gas emissions. We can quantify renewable energy use, right? It's much harder to quantify the benefit that having, a 50-50 split between men and women on your board of directors, for example. It's much easier to quantify your renewable energy consumption than it is the benefit that you achieve, right? You can look at how much renewable energy you got, how much it costs. You can compare that to the cost of fossil fuels, financial benefit. Easy, right? Like that's, I could do that with no, I don't need a model to do that, right? I can just build that in Excel in 10 minutes. Whereas the diversity benefits are different, right? It's a different kind of benefit. It happens over many years, or it happens with a product development, right? So those are some of the things I'm seeing. Hopefully that wasn't too rambly. Hopefully that made sense.
No, that makes totally sense. Like there are some things that are quantifiable and other things that are just not, like what you were saying of this 50-50 diversity board and all this S and G part of ESG, which people are not actually quantifying within the value creation part of the equation. Talking about value creation, do you think this approach of private equity funds is more towards this, like value creation measurements, or more of a risk adverse project or
That's a good
initiative?
question. That is a really good question, because I think the answer is both, in my opinion. Which one is it more of is a tough question that I don't. I'll try to add some points, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which one it's more. But I think from the risk reduction standpoint, there are clearly risks associated with ignoring your ESG metrics in today's marketplace. I think any savvy business person can see that, for example, people don't want to buy products from a company that they despise. Like some will, but some won't, right? So if you're looking at it from a customer perspective, there's that angle, right?
Yeah.
Doing better on your ESG metrics, on your reporting, on your transparency will generally create more interest from consumer, will cause less consumers to turn away. There's also the government regulation aspect, which we already kind of touched upon, where, there is a good example would be PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, the utility in California, who was recently convicted of starting being the cause of one of the largest wildfires that happened in California. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but basically in California, out west in the United States, there have been severe wildfires basically every summer now for the past 5 or 6 years that have caused a ton of destruction. And the electric utility in California was held liable for starting them. Because of their infrastructure. It's old, it sparks, and it started fires. And so they've had to pay billions of dollars in terms of upgrading their system, in terms of paying the victims and their insurance claims. So that's a real risk, right? Like even if there's not a law on the books now today, if you do something that results in a very negative externality, you can be held liable for that. Right. So, and businesses see that. And so businesses understand we need to get out in front of this, right? It's risk reduction. So there's definitely that side of it. Then there's also the side of it that is value creation that I talked about before. And I think from the private equity perspective, this is definitely a big piece of it because, like I said, that's part of their business model. Acquire, add value, transformation. Typically that's done by, you fire the CEO and their leadership team, you bring in your own, make things more efficient, cut out waste, blah, 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 right? That's sort of the typical private equity model. But they view this as sort of the new frontier, right? That's like played out. Everyone knows how to do that old model. So this is like a new model where it's like if we can be on the forefront, if we can figure out good strategies from our firm's perspective, that's going to put us ahead of our competitors. And that's value creation for them, right? That's what they do, what they view as a core competency. So I think it's both. I think from the business perspective, it's probably still more on the risk reduction side. Whereas on the private equity perspective, they're viewing it from, it's more 50-50, I would say, but maybe a slight lean towards value creation.
Yeah, and increasing profits, right? which is their main goal. Um, okay. Thanks for your take. Actually, really long answer, which I like. Also, I didn't know about these wildfires in California. I remember last year hearing about it, but uh, not quite about the causes from this corporate
Yeah,
world.
yeah.
Um, Maybe let's jump again to a topic which we touch upon. This main hurdles, main problems of private equity firms right now integrating
Mhm.
ESG. I I said before this data problem was a pretty big one,
Yep.
which BCG with this EDCI initiative was working upon. But do you see any other problems going on right now? I don't know. Do you have like regular contact with these LPs or GPs, private equity firms? Do you talk with them
So
or?
I personally do not.
Hmm.
That is sort of those relationships are handled a bit higher up the food chain, since so much
Yeah,
of the industry is kind of,
I see. Hmm.
people know each other and people just, they get coffee, they go to conferences, they talk.
Hmm.
Like it's very much
Yeah.
that kind of world. Um, but other is I mean the data thing is the big thing, right?
Hmm.
How do we, and that's what a lot of firms worry about, is they worry about the data validation, right? How do we know that the data that's being reported to us is genuine,
Hmm.
and not made up? And so that is a more difficult area. There are a lot of companies in the field that do the data collection and validation. So we are
Hmm.
definitely, I think there's going to be like a key player that will emerge from that field. Right now, it's a very new field, so there's lots of different startups, and everyone is kind of doing their own thing. But I think
Yeah.
over time, that will, sort of the natural cycle of business will take place, and companies will merge, companies will disappear.
Hmm.
And I think having sort of a central organizing arm of the data collection, like having so like the Google of ESG data collection, right? Where it's like this is who you go
Okay.
to, or maybe like Moody's is a better one, right? Like
Yeah,
S&P,
no, it's
Moody's,
good.
rating agencies,
Yeah.
right? Having like a couple players in the game that like do this work, while maybe not the most like competitive structure, I think will go a long way towards driving standardization in data collection, which is an important next step.
Hmm.
Making sure that everyone agrees. I think so that's one. I think another big challenge, when sort of from my perspective, is looking
Hmm.
at things, sort of going beyond the low hanging fruit, right? Right
Hmm.
now, it's all so new that there's so much low hanging fruit. It's really easy for firms to, like, both private equity and portfolio companies, to do the least and get a lot out of it, in terms of like participating in certain projects or like doing certain reports. You don't
Hmm.
have to go very deep right now. I
Yeah.
think the next challenge for the industry will be going, and for all industry, will be going from the top level, like up here,
Hmm.
more granular, more specific,
Yeah.
looking at just the emissions from your supply chain, for example, or just your scope 3 emissions, right? Like just,
Yeah.
certain smaller areas, because that's what's going to happen. We're going to pluck all the low hanging fruit, and we're going to be like, an eighth of the way there, and it's going to be
Yeah.
like, okay, now we have to roll up our sleeves and actually get to work, right? And I
Hmm.
think, for a lot of people that still view ESG as like an extra, like this isn't part of my job, this is just something else I have to do.
Hmm.
It's easy to do the low hanging fruit. Everyone pats you on the back, says you're doing a great job, but to go that next level is a lot harder. And I think that's going to be a big challenge as well, and I think that's going to be true not just for business, but for governments, for people,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
everyone. So yeah, I think those are some of my thoughts on what's next and what the challenges are that remain.
So you mean like effective frameworks, effective regulations for all companies, which can go more to granular data, like more
Yeah, to
specific
granular data, and to
measurements.
looking at, ESG is so broad. Like each one, E, S, and G, are all like, um, they're all their own problems, right? They all have their own unique their own unique idiosyncrasies and issues and
Mm-hmm.
granularity that needs to be dug into. And as long as we continue talking about ESG as just one thing, it's going to be really
Yes.
hard to do that. And so I think eventually we're going to have to start breaking it out into each one being its own thing,
Mm-hmm.
and companies looking at it from that perspective. But for now, we're still on the let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Let's just keep
Mm-hmm.
moving it forward. But I think within the next few years, some of those questions are going to get louder and more difficult to not acknowledge.
Yes, of course. Very interesting that you talk about the next few years because my next question, maybe the last one or last to last one, was
Yeah.
about what do you think is going to happen the next years? Like which trends do you see in the industry within this data problem? Also, maybe the problems you just touch upon about this
Yeah.
regulation framework, granularity,
Yeah. I
everything.
think so. I think there's a few. I think some of the big ones that are coming are number one, there's going to be more government regulation. I
Mm-hmm.
think even I think that could be a little different in the US if the general election in 2024 doesn't go towards the Democrats. I think it might get that could get pushed for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I think definitely in Europe, Asia, I
Yeah.
know less about, so it's hard for me to speak to it. But definitely in Europe, more regulation is coming. There's talk of a carbon tax. There's talk of other pretty significant regulations. But we're seeing it in Massachusetts, or not Massachusetts, sorry, in the United States too, because we
Mm-hmm.
have a federalist system where states and federal government make their own laws. A lot of states are passing very aggressive climate goals. And so that's going to start coming into play. So more government regulation. I think when it comes to data, we are going to start to see some condensing of the industry as companies merge, as companies um, fail, for lack of a better word, run out of money and
Mm-hmm.
disappear. I think we're going to start to see some more convergence among data reporting platforms, which will be good. And then I think we're going to start seeing, the big theme right now is like this idea of like deployment. And so
Mm-hmm.
right now there's a ton of from banks, for example, there's a ton of money that's being committed to fight climate change or to address
Mm-hmm.
social issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
Banks are coming out every day. There's a new oh, we pledged $500 million, $600 million, whatever, to fighting climate change. But
Yeah.
what's your strategy? How are you doing that? What are you
Okay.
spending that money on? Right? That's going to
Okay.
be the next step. Is the people that can figure out efficient and scalable models for deploying that capital are
Mm-hmm.
good. That's going to be the big next thing that's coming, I think. And the people and the businesses that can figure out how to do that are going to be able to certainly make a lot of money for themselves, but hopefully do a lot of good for society as well. And I think being able to understand and quantify that good that you did for society is going to
Yeah.
be a key point in getting that money unlocked, right? You can't just go to a bank and say, this is going to help, you can use your climate funding for this project. Trust me, promise, I got it. They're going to say no. Let me see, what is your greenhouse gas avoidance? What is your renewable, how much renewable energy will this produce over how much, you know what I mean? Banks are
Yes.
going to want to know and want you to be able to say what your societal impact will be. And
Yes.
so you're going to have to be able, that's just going to become part of the conversation when it comes to, getting capital for projects, for getting investment for your business, whatever it might be, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to produce these metrics. And
Mm-hmm.
so the companies that are able to do that and to understand what their impact is are going to be at a big advantage.
Okay. For financing, you mean more or less?
Yes, for financing.
Mm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Whether it
Um.
be on as a whole business or as an individual project.
Oh, yeah, 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 right. Um. Josh, I want to know, you have a lot of expertise on this topic. How did you achieve it? What did you read or what?
um, a lot of reading and a lot of talking to people would be my
Okay.
advice.
Within your company? Mm-hmm.
I worked in the clean energy field for 5 years
Yeah,
before
yeah,
my
yeah.
MBA as well. So a lot of it came from work, but a lot of that was really just reading, signing up. If you're interested, signing up for services like Utility Dive They do
Mhm.
daily and weekly newsletters that you can sign up where they send articles about what's going
Mhm.
on and the
Mhm.
implications,
Yeah.
finding and reading, yeah, just like staying abreast of what's going on out in the world. And then also
Okay.
talking to people. Like a lot of this is also from things that we talk about, whether it be at this job or at past jobs or at
Mhm.
school, talking to people and asking them, asking them these questions that you've asked me today, right? Like
Yeah.
that's really how you learn because a lot of the same trends come up over and
Of
over
course.
again. Like it seems overwhelming at first, but over time you realize that everyone's kind of talking about the same thing. And it's
Yeah.
just a matter of like figuring out, okay, like what can I do? Where can I add value personally in all of these problems that are being talked about?
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, I have talking to four more people, and everyone's kind of on the same line, like talking about the challenges, chances, everything's
Yep.
kind of melting together. So,
Awesome. That's good.
um, yes. Do you have any recommendations for further research, more on the quantitative side, that you would say, look,
Hmm.
this would be interesting to see? Because you work a lot
Okay.
with data, so maybe.
Yeah, let me think on that. Because I do actually have to run in a minute or so, but let me think on
Mm,
that. I can send a follow-up
all right.
email with stuff that does come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And yeah, if there's still stuff you're thinking about, feel free to send me an email. I think my personal, yeah, you don't, if you have questions, you can just email me directly. My email is on this meeting invite,
Okay.
the expand research one. So feel
All
free
right.
to just shoot me an email if you have questions about anything. And when you finish your paper, I'd love to read it too. So definitely send that over as well.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'm going to. Thanks a lot
Awesome.
for your time,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
your
Happy to help.
energy within this topic was really inspiring.
Awesome. No, I'm glad it was helpful. And yeah, don't be afraid. Don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out anytime.
All right. See you then, Josh. Bye.